We've already lost our old Hearthstone. And we fear we might lose the little we still have.
Amid the entirely deserved criticism of the game, the community ignores the broader context, and in our view, this creates a distorted perspective on what's happening to the game right now.
As players, we fully share the opinion of many prominent community figures. But as content creators, we want to balance out the emotional reactions with another point of view, and some proper analysis.
Marvel Snap's bitter lesson showed us that when things go wrong, players can make them much worse. And that's an important lesson for all of us.
2 years ago, we came to the conclusion that Hearthstone was heading towards a dead end that could not be avoided.
Now we understand that the path into that dead end was actually set during the game's most amazing period.
But let's go step by step. A successful live service game must firmly stand on 3 key pillars: engaging gameplay, sustainable monetization, and an involved community. And it's impossible to ignore the fact that Hearthstone has issues with all 3 of these aspects. The game has always struggled with feedback loops, and under current conditions this problem has become even more severe, directly affecting the community. The team doesn't even try to create the illusion of a dialogue. The leadership, fully aware of the consequences of their actions, keeps introducing changes that drive players mad. But in reality, they have no reason to maintain a dialogue if they can't or won't act differently. If most of the destructive decisions aim to boost revenue, then the ridiculous hat situation has no explanation whatsoever. Here's someone who was the only healthy link of communication between the community and the game team, yet for over a month, they didn't renew his contract, despite direct demands from players on social media and massive support from popular community figures.
The second sore spot for the game is its gameplay itself. It's foolish to deny the at least questionable aspects of the current design philosophy, or the lack of a positive impact from the new expansion. But based on the feedback, you might think the current state of the game is one of the worst in its entire history.
There are problems, but just how bad is it on the catastrophe scale? We carefully collect data on changes in meta satisfaction among our viewers. As you can see, the whole past year showed uninspiring results, and the release of the Heroes of StarCraft mini-set was the only period that satisfied most players. After rotation, players' sentiment started to look like a roller coaster, high hopes and total disappointment replacing each other, while the new expansion feels like a flop that even a major balance patch couldn't fix.
Players are unhappy, that's a fact. But so far, there's no reason to believe this discontent is critical. For example, the graph of total Legend players shows that despite the flop of the new expansion, the overall number of players pushing for Legend increased and nearly returned to its new normal after the massive return of Chinese players to national servers. The number of Legend players is now higher than in 2022, when many people thought the game was in much better shape.
Another indirect sign that Hearthstone is not on its deathbed is the result of our research on average levels and the rewards track among our audience. By considering all possible factors, we estimate how many minutes our viewers spend daily in Hearthstone on average.
This is far from a precise metric, but it can highlight noticeable shifts in player activity. For example, 2021 was an outright disaster. During the Fractured and Alterac Valley phase, daily player activity dropped by an average of -11 minutes. That means the game was so uninteresting to players that they stopped doing even daily quests en masse at some point. These results are backed by the stats from the event that ran at that time. Despite the community loudly criticizing the meta throughout 2024, our audience's engagement remained at least positive. So we can conclude that problems do exist. Players have been dissatisfied for a long time, yet they continue to play quite actively. Moreover, it seems that regular players partially enjoy the ideology of drastic meta shifts and explosive combos, unlike pro players, who are completely exhausted by it.
There's absolutely no doubt that the game is struggling with sustainable monetization. The attempts to monetize everything, often in the most blatant ways, are indirect proof of this.
Players need to accept an unpleasant reality. Financial sustainability is the only guarantee that support for the game as a live service will continue.
Creating a steady content pipeline is extremely expensive, and we as players should be interested in making sure the game monetizes effectively, because that's the only thing that gives it the resilience for a long lifespan. I know, after hearing this, it's tempting to hit the dislike button, but it's simply the reality, and unfortunately, many created content forget to remind the audience about this. The Warcraft Rumble experience showed us that even with $1.5 million in monthly revenue, Microsoft's leadership no longer sees any point in long-term development and resorts to cost-cutting and laying off about half the team. And if revenue drops to $500,000, they lose all motivation to release new content. It's far easier for any live service game to get dangerously close to that point than you might think.
Monetization has always been an integral part of Hearthstone. Blizzard has always looked for ways to squeeze maximum profit from the game. New monetization methods were introduced gradually but consistently, and most of them ultimately had a positive effect. Rotation, combined with dropping the alternation of expansions and adventures, preserved the relevance of new sets, which positively impacted both monetization and gameplay.
But this has always sparked at least mixed reactions from players. I clearly remember my disappointment when one of the rare patches added only new paid skins and nothing else. I also remember how worried I was about the first card rotation, and how the disappearance of adventures slowed my collection progress and made the game noticeably more expensive.
Was it greed? Yes, yes and yes again. Blizzard wanted to get the maximum out of it. They optimized their business. They weren't running a charity. How terrible. On the other hand, they created stable revenue streams, and in return we got long-term development that has lasted 11 years. Without achieving financial sustainability in the past, the game could never have lived this long. New monetization tools aren't just about greed. They're also about prolonging the support and development of a beloved live service game.
In 2014, Hearthstone's success sparked a new wave in the development of card games. Every year, more and more competitors and ambitious projects appeared, all under the unofficial title of Hearthstone Killer. Games like Gwent and Legends of Runeterra couldn't match Hearthstone in terms of content volume, so they chose the strategy of undercutting prices, which ultimately prevented them from gaining financial stability. The idea that you should just make good games and the money will follow is idealistic bravado, especially in the cynical world of live service games. Publishers need steady, substantial revenue to plan even regular content releases, which are developed a year in advance. The audience for card games is unique, and the genre has its limitations. For this reason, no collectible card game as a service has ever managed to reach financial success purely by selling cosmetics instead of gameplay advantages. The experience of Gwent and Legends of Runeterra was a crucial lesson for the whole industry. Players aren't willing to pay for generosity, loyalty, or high quality if there's no clear system of motivations.
Every year, the industry became more and more crowded, with fewer new players and revenue spread among an ever-growing number of competitors. The conditions are harsh. Every game is searching for new growth points and ways to slow down declining income. The shifting circumstances forced Hearthstone to adapt and change.
At the end of 2018, Ben Lee became the new director of Hearthstone, and from that point began the golden era of the game. But strangely enough, it was the consequences of his strategy that set the countdown for the beginning of the crisis. Faced with ever-growing competition, Blizzard decided to get ahead and implemented an ambitious, unique plan to transform Hearthstone's concept. It would no longer be just a card game like its competitors, it would become a true platform for card games. Creating trends, completely in the spirit of Hearthstone. The most important advantage of transforming the game into a card game platform could have been the crucial reduction of dependency on Standard. Standard is the main mode from a commercial perspective, and the developers are obliged to keep it the top priority. But this heavily limits their ability to create new, more friendly ways to play that could compete with it. The commercial success of alternative modes could have reduced the pressure on the main development team.
One by one, we saw the releases of Battlegrounds, Duels, the new Demon Hunter class, the classic format, and mini-sets for Standard, and the cherry on top was Mercenaries, a massive in-scale game mode, designed to expand the audience and create an additional revenue stream. These fundamentally different ways to play were unified by a completely new progression system, the rewards track. At the same time, Blizzard began actively monetizing Battlegrounds with every kind of cosmetic possible, and sharply increased the number of paid portraits for traditional Hearthstone. They introduced the Tavern Pass, Diamond Cards, Runestones as an intermediate currency, and began developing signature cards on the Death Knight class.
My favorite year was 2019. 3 amazing adventures, 1 story arc, and tons of narrative content, including a unique story-driven tavern brawl. Using all the voice lines and trailers, I managed to create a 45-minute film with a clear, detailed plot. I fell in love with Hearthstone for its unique ability to tell stories through cards. A special place in my robotic heart was reserved for the Mercenaries mode, and the lore built around its main characters.
Overall, it felt like the game was evolving rapidly. The amount of effort the developers put in over just 3 years was phenomenal.
The main tragedy is that the result of the team's titanic efforts to overhaul the game into a platform looked like a major failure. Players didn't appreciate the team's efforts, and the execution often fell short because of constraints that were invisible to the players. The entry barrier for new ways to play turned out to be too high. Duels only gained a niche audience, and the developers were forced to abandon their initial monetization approach, which relied on unlocking additional hero powers and treasures through expanding your standard collection. Players heavily criticized this. Interest in the classic format was low even at launch. The monetization model for mercenaries looked absurd next to the completely free battlegrounds. The push to increase monetization through cosmetics also didn't yield significant results. Players demanded more than the developers could deliver, but back then, we were so stupid and did not understand this. At best, Ben Lee managed to slow down the decline in revenue. At least in the mobile market, there were no new growth points. After Ben Lee stepped down as director in 2022, unexpected events severely worsened the situation. Blizzard's exit from the Chinese market and American sanctions, which blocked players in Russia from making purchases due to the military aggression against Ukraine, nearly halved Hearthstone's revenue. As we can now clearly see, this turned out to be catastrophic for the game.
We tried to warn the audience about this, but we often heard that we were incompetent and drawing conclusions based on completely irrelevant data.
It seems that without Chinese money and with no new growth points, Hearthstone has come dangerously close to that critical edge, just like Warcraft Rumble. In these conditions, maintaining the platform was no longer rational, especially since the players didn't value the effort. What's the point of supporting new ways to play if players don't want to pay for them? We were prepared for Blizzard and Microsoft leadership to change strategies, but honestly, we underestimated the scale of what would happen. The decision was made to cut spending on game support, and this process fell to the new director, Tyler Bielman. Unlike Ben Lee's ambitious expansion ideas, the new strategy was about cutting everything unnecessary. The team was downsized, support for modes was phased out, new content shrank, the narrative element, including cinematics, disappeared, and solo content development came to a final halt. Many processes became standardized to avoid redundant effort, including marketing, PR, and communication. This standardization was especially visible in the templated approach to events, which turned them into bland, unremarkable reward packages. Effectively, in scale, the game returned almost to its origins, but with battlegrounds and 2 new classes, and without new tavern brawls, storylines, solo content, or even free boards. All resources were redirected and focused solely on monetizing standard. Leadership even halted the release of new cosmetics for battlegrounds. Free boards, which were once part of the game's identity, turned into $60 mythic skins. But that's not all. Monetization started creeping into gameplay itself. Battlegrounds tokens that sell in-game advantages for real money, and early access to cards via pre-orders. The recent arena changes were designed to reduce the usefulness of rewards and create incentives to buy tickets with real money. The cherry on top is the implementation of pets through a gacha mechanic priced at $158. Against this backdrop, the price hike for the Heroes of StarCraft mini-set looks trivial.
We're not sure how much autonomy Tyler Bielman actually has in his decisions. Most likely, he was simply tasked with cutting instead of expanding, but there's no doubt that his goal is to find new ways to monetize effectively.
We fully understand the motives of the leadership. Moreover, we believe that finding new growth points is critically important for the game's long-term future.
We're ready to accept major compromises if new monetization methods prove effective, even if we don't like them as players. But the tragedy is that the leadership's actions are painfully damaging the game, while bringing no noticeable positive results for revenue.
Selling mythic skins instead of giving out free boards clearly didn't meet the big expectations. This later forced them to resort to an overuse of gacha lotteries to distribute the pet. The whole idea looks more like an act of desperation than what was originally intended.
Despite the widespread backlash, as we expected, implementing the pet through a gacha mechanic at least managed to offset the drop in mobile revenue during the pre-release period, when interest in pre-orders for the new expansion was lower.
Our subscribers spent noticeably more money on buying random prizes than they did on fixed-price mythic portraits, even though supposedly only half as many players actually got the pet. The idea definitely proved financially effective, but calling it a new growth point is still very difficult. It's also hard to assess how much this cannibalized spending on other shop offers in favor of the hunt for random gifts. Overall, 11% of our viewers paid money to participate, and this relatively high figure shows that such an approach is appealing to at least some players. which means it has a right to exist, even if you really dislike it. The main intrigue is whether the financial result met management's expectations, and based on what they do next, we'll see how satisfied they are.
It's also worth noting that alongside these destructive steps, the leadership has made some very good strategic decisions. The introduction of the pre-release Tavern Brawl had a positive impact on pre-order numbers. But the biggest achievement remains the approach of bringing Hearthstone back to China. Blizzard showed unprecedented generosity, flexibility, and goodwill by gifting players all the cards from missed sets, even in golden versions. This worked, attracting a very large audience. Despite this, revenue on iOS devices in China continues its gradual decline. Moreover, the attempt to flirt with signature cards in a national style seems to have failed. The release of the Shan Shui bundles had a tiny impact on revenue, and the effectiveness of the Inkwash signature bundles remains a mystery. They were launched alongside the Emerald Dream mini set, but since the game earned less during this period compared to the previous mini set, it suggests this monetization approach was not very effective.
The revenue drop confirms the overall trend of declining effectiveness of old monetization methods. Generosity alone does not drive more profit.
Hearthstone is slowly facing the same problems that once killed Gwent and Legends of Runeterra. Fortunately for Hearthstone, the mobile market is not its only revenue stream. The game has gained resilience thanks to its successful return to China. Beyond that, we still hope that the decline in monetization efficiency on Mac and PC is not as sharp.
But for Marvel Snap, the situation is much worse. The game faces the same difficulties with declining returns from old monetization strategies. Snap has also run into many unexpected problems recently, which severely damaged its promotion. The developers are actively working on new modes and implementing them as limited-time events, something like Tavern Brawls, but on a much bigger scale. A very interesting concept compared to the template events in Hearthstone. High Voltage was one of these short-term events, where players could earn currency and unlock rewards of their choice. The most valuable reward was a new card, Kid Omega. To be honest, I'm not sure that I figured out all the details, but it seems that in order to get it for free, players had to actively grind, winning more than 70 matches every day, or buy the card immediately for over $100. It's basically a form of early access at an insane price. Amid the loss of financial efficiency, the developers were forced to urgently search for new growth points, and resorted to the worst possible way to save the game. Naturally, this sparked outrage among players, which then turned into calls for a total boycott of all purchases. Every popular figure who commented on what happened repeated the same line about disappointment, without mentioning the context. Personally, I haven't seen a single review that tried to figure out why the developers did this. Greed looks like the best explanation for everything, but even here, the situation is more complicated.
The performance stats from the mobile market confirm that there are serious growing problems. Revenue trends and new player acquisition are significantly worse compared to other competitors, despite the fact that Snap is primarily a mobile game and should be leading the market.
While at the beginning of 2023 the game steadily held a place in the top 200 highest-grossing mobile apps worldwide, after all the turmoil it now manages to reach that position only on the day a new season launches. The wave of hate made things even worse. Players wanted to punish the leadership, but in doing so, they may have shortened the game's lifespan. Revenue collapsed to a minimum, and if this trend continues, Snap could be on the brink of death within a year. I couldn't imagine that one day I would start to worry about the fate of Snap. The game has turned from a leader in the mobile market to an outsider. And I am very sad, because this situation demonstrates that it is incredibly difficult to fix the situation with financial efficiency, and in a few years Hearthstone may find itself in the same position.
Players and popular community figures completely forgot that they're out at sea, in the middle of a storm, stuck in the same boat as the developers. Players are passengers, and they ended up in the storm because of the leadership's decisions to order the developers to row straight into the eye of it. Of course, players are powerless to fix things, but they did take actions that worsened an already bad situation. Giving into emotion, they were the ones who drilled extra holes in this boat. Any boycott or call to completely stop making purchases is, first and foremost, a painful blow to the game we love.
For us, it's still a matter of debate. Does the community bear its share of responsibility in this situation?
Ignoring problems, staying silent, and withholding criticism are signs of a lack of communication with the developers, and that is definitely the wrong path.
But at the same time, harshly criticizing the developers' actions, especially new monetization methods, without mentioning the context is extremely dangerous.
In any case, I really don't want to see Hearthstone one day repeat Snap's fate. Judging by the unimpressive results of the current strategy, there may be even more shocking monetization experiments in the near future, and we want players to understand why this is happening.
We believe that the level of emotion could drop significantly if players understood the reasons behind the leadership's seemingly absurd actions. Moreover, the time will come when players will have to choose between a painful compromise and the risk of losing the game. And at that moment, it will be crucial not to give in to emotion, and not to start drilling holes in the hull of the Hearthstone boat. Looking back, I realize how many wonderful things we had just a few years ago, and how simply we've lost it all. I deeply miss Hearthstone as a platform for different ways to play, but now we have to think about how not to lose what little we still have left.
We've spent too long trapped in the illusion that players always know what's best for the game, but in reality, what's good for players is not always good for a live service game. Because of this, we've made it our mission to constantly remind our audience about the importance of monetization and the context the game is in. Also, about how Blizzard persistently tested every fair method they could before resorting to that awful gacha mechanic. Sadly, we must admit that not tons of content, nor new modes, nor amazing narrative, nor selling cosmetics, nor adventures, nor increased friendliness have had any noticeable long-term effect on revenue. As players, we see all this as something basic, not as a stroke of luck or an act of generosity.
Despite this, we have no intention of ignoring the team's and management's mistakes, especially when the damage done to the game shows no clear signs of increasing financial sustainability.
Finally, we want to close this with a question. Are you ready for a painful compromise if Hearthstone finds itself in its own fatal storm? Would you agree to a radical reduction of gold in the progression system, replaced with packs instead?
Or maybe you'll quietly leave the game, or become one of those who pick up the drill and start making a hole in the ship's hull?
I won't hide it. For me personally, accepting such a compromise would be incredibly hard.
Against the backdrop of a scenario like that, the gacha pet looks completely harmless. And what do you think?
Let us know your thoughts below and join the polls in your community tab. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to support our content and stay updated.
Traditionally, we want to express our boundless gratitude to our sponsors.
Dear friends, your help is invaluable. We will be grateful for any support.
Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for spending this time with us. We really hope that we will have the opportunity to get in touch in the next video.
Take care of yourself.
And never give up.
Job's done.